name is Tyler Brown. At Markel, I help Tom Gaynor, a person for who many of you needs no introduction, manage the public equity portfolio as well as run investor relations. So if I haven't had the chance to meet you, I look forward to doing so. A word I often hear Tom use is serendipity or serendipitous. Driving the use of this word is an ethos that emanates the halls at Markel. The belief that when we gather, listen, learn from others, and more importantly, do nice things for other people, good things usually follow. In that spirit, we gather here today to listen and learn from some amazing and impressive people. But before I turn the stage to Richard Coughlin, our moderator for the C-suite conversation, I wanted to briefly share a few words about Markel's vision for its annual shareholders meeting. Since 1991, Markel has been going to the Berkshire annual meeting. That first year, Tom and Steve Markel got some bagels and coffee and grabbed a room, and about 6 people showed up. This past year, we welcomed over 1,300 guests to our now well-known and famous Sunday Omaha brunch. As Tom likes to say, there's an interesting correlation between the amount of people that show up at our Omaha brunch and our stock price. And as spurious as that correlation may be, it speaks to the power of people and the power of relationships. One of the greatest contributors to the Markel win-win-win architecture are people like you. Over the last 3 decades, Markel has witnessed what the Berkshire meeting has meant to all who have attended. It has seen what it has meant to Berkshire, it has felt what it has meant to Markel, and it has even seen what it has meant to the city of Omaha. Last year, forced to improvise due to the pandemic, we moved our annual meeting outside to this venue at the Raceway. We decided to spice things up with a little quirk and fun and our own personality, all born under the premise of why can't we create something here in Richmond similar to what Berkshire achieved in Omaha. And so it is with this lofty aspiration that we started to come up with more ways to gather, listen, learn, and have serendipitous moments like these panels. And next year, if you all have so much fun and bring just one more person and come back yourself, and that person subsequently does the same the next year and so on, it will only take until 2027 for us to achieve the scope and hopefully the magic of what Berkshire achieved this past year in Omaha. So we invite all of you to join us in this journey as we try to create something special here in Richmond. Finally, some housekeeping items. We ask that as the day goes on, you respect the speakers on the stage with your silence and attention. Certainly know it's a long day, so if you have a business call or want to catch up with a friend, we just ask that you do so outside of earshot of the speakers. We are filming the session, so be mindful of the cameras as you come and go. The Rabati sessions will have short breaks in between, so if you're coming back to your seat as people are speaking, just be respectful and mindful of that. Finally, I wanted to point everyone's attention to the Costa plants all around me. These are provided by Costa Farms, which is part of our Ventures family. Costa Farms is headquartered in Miami, Florida, and is one of the largest horticultural growers in the world. And you can find plants like these and even their beautiful new trending tropicals line in garden centers, home improvement centers, and grocery stores near you. So check those out, and thank you to our Costa Farms family. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the stage an award-winning educator and professor of management at the University of Richmond, Richard Coughlin. Richard is on the faculty at the Robbins School of Business. He has an MBA and PhD in judgment and decision-making from the University of Arizona. He holds an undergraduate degree from the University of Virginia, go Hoos. And in 2011, he created the amazing C-Suite Conversations, a series of unscripted, on-stage interviews conducted live in front of audiences from the business and campus communities around us. They have a great website. If you have not gone online to check those out, I highly recommend it. There are few moderators that are better researched, more prepared, and more insightful than Richard. So please all join me in welcoming Richard.
Tyler, thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. Really excited to bring C-Suite Conversations on the road. As Tyler said, we created this series at the University of Richmond 11 years ago. The series really is possible because of the support of PNC Bank. There are a number of PNC bankers here in the room today, and we're grateful for the ongoing support. They support our events on campus, they support our events off campus, and it's really been a great partnership. We also enjoy a partnership with Chamber RVA. They've been such good partners to promote these programs and to drive audiences to what we do. I would simply add one thing to what Tyler said. One of those C-Suite conversations we did just a few years ago was with Tom Gaynor. It's a one-on-one conversation we're very proud of. Thought that we drew a couple of things out of him that other interviewers had not, and all of those videos are archived and available on the University of Richmond's website under C-Suite Conversations. I want to invite four great CEOs, CIOs to the stage, allow them to come up, and then we'll get this conversation going. So if the guests will please join me on stage, I want to provide a brief introduction of each. On the far side of the stage is Tim Hathaway, the Chief Investment Officer, a partner at Brown Advisory, graduate of Loyola University of Baltimore. Tim has had a variety of roles at Brown Advisory and really helped navigate the firm and its clients through the pandemic. Sitting next to him is Ting Chu. Ting was also a guest of mine some years ago for a one-on-one interview on stage at the University of Richmond. Simply put, Ting is one of Richmond's greatest entrepreneurial success stories. At the age of 19, she and her family began to sell decorative flags at the State Fair, Virginia, and that is now a multi-million-dollar business with hundreds of employees. She has remained involved. That company is going close to 30 years now, and it's a wonderful story. You'll get to hear a bit of that. Sitting next to Ting is Susan Gaynor. Susan is CEO of Parkland Ventures, one of the Markel Ventures portfolio companies. They run communities of modular housing, and she'll talk to affordable housing and some of the challenges that her residents and her workers faced throughout the pandemic. I should have said that Ting Chu's company is Evergreen Enterprises, in case you're doing your research. And right next to me is Zach Smith, the CEO of Partner MD. He had a long run at Midwest Vaco in West Rock prior to becoming the CEO of Partner MD. Partner MD provides concierge medicine in a variety of practices spread throughout particularly this region of the U.S. I'll start with you, Zach, actually, because the pandemic was so much about healthcare. I suspect that the fact that healthcare is the conversation in the country in March of 2020, April 2020, that helps you in some ways. The conversation wasn't necessarily about concierge medicine, so you have a bit of a challenge. But people were, in March of 2020, starting to think a whole lot more about getting close to their doctor. How did it shape the way that you helped navigate Partner MD through that?
First of all, thanks, Richard. Appreciate the invite. Appreciate being here with everyone. I'm the lucky one to get the seat with the retina burn. So I can't see any of you now, but I will do the best I can. Well, I think it's been helpful to reflect back on the last 2 or 3 years and realize that actually it's not just COVID that we've all gone through. It actually gets worse. The mental stress on people, the lack of or decline in trust in institutions, racial unrest, just a lot going on in our customers' minds and our teammates' minds throughout the last 2 or 3 years. And I think it's actually important to take stock in all of those things that are taking place around the world, and it's made us get better at a lot of things. Competency-wise, we've had to be a lot more adaptable. We've had to increase our tolerance for risk. A lot of decisions we made early on was probably 65% certainty. I'd like to be maybe a little bit higher than that, 80%, and we just couldn't. Decisiveness, demonstrating confidence to our customers and our employees and our teammates, really, really important. And then having a fact-based, optimistic story to tell. In spite of everything, there's a lot of good things happening to our business, good things happening to our patients, and we had to always make sure that was more front of mind. And I know this probably sounds like a cliche, but I think from a leadership standpoint, we all had to be a lot more human. we had to kind of gray the line between personal and professional as we made those decisions. And so that's a bit of a high-level response, not just a medical response to the challenge of COVID, but there's no doubt that families around the world have shifted their priorities, and their healthcare decisions have kind of gone to the top of the line. This never comes out the right way, but I think our business model is actually quite helpful to people, beneficial to people on the heels of a pandemic.
When it first sets in, the adaptability that you're talking about takes what form? People still need to have a conversation with their doctor. So what sort of adaptability were you dealing with, say, in the spring of 2020 and summer of 2020?
Yeah, I think, first of all, if you look at our business, you could break it down and suggest that we're knowledge brokers about healthcare. We inform and we educate. And I think the challenge for us is that we had to be very visible and very frequent in our exchanges with customers and not have 100% of the information. And so we had to get comfortable about having sort of a full disclosure before we went and talked to our customers that what we're telling you now actually may change a week from now. And so it required us to be more adaptable to just having a higher visible presence in the community with our employees and with our patients.
Suspect that a demand for their services increases, but you can't just turn on supply like that. One of the challenges I know, that always faces medical practices is where do the next doctors come from? Where do the next nurses come from? How much of a challenge was it to scale toward that demand with respect to the medical professionals and their willingness to jump out of a traditional practice into something like what you run?
One of the things that we did probably a year into this is decide as a leadership team, sort of against all common wisdom, to actually begin that scale-up process. We felt like on the heels of COVID there would be sort of a rush to our facilities. So the mistake we made is instead of bringing on 6 docs, we should have brought on 12 docs. And in hindsight, I can say that back then, even hiring 6 docs didn't feel like necessarily the perfect solution. But the physician shortage in our country is a crisis right now. It is very, very difficult to find physicians, family practice, primary care physicians for any company, much less one like ours. And so I read a statistic the other day, it's not going to get any better. In 10 years, 40% of our primary care docs are going to be over the age of 65. So that physician shortage, on top of what we've all experienced with COVID, has made it quite challenging. And I don't see that letting up anytime real soon.
Feels to me like a practice such as Partner MD has a role to play in shifting the conversation away from masks and vaccines toward wellness, toward full treatment, if you will. How do you see that?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The model of concierge medicine really exists on time and access. And so you get sufficient amount of time building a relationship with your doc. A typical visit for us is about 45 minutes, whereas a traditional care is going to be 5 minutes. So access when you need it at a time that we're living through right now is really critical, but probably insufficient for where we want to take the company long term. And I think it's a more interesting vision for us to think about words like performance and prevention and longevity. So rather than look at our facility as a visit to a doctor's office, it's more of a health consultancy. And there's a growing segment of people that are very curious about not just treating a disease, but reaching higher levels of performance. And that's a younger segment that I'm really excited about doing more business with. I'm
going to turn to Susan Gaynor now. One of the next priorities after your healthcare was taken care of was really thinking differently about your home. The pandemic had all of us thinking about home as a base now in a different way. The residents of your communities, some of them are in a position where they had to go to work straight from the pandemic, hourly workers and a variety of things. They couldn't necessarily be home as much as the white-collar worker. But the sense of community, the sense of being home, the sense of not being in a large apartment building during March and April of 2020 was a really important piece. What were the initial feelings that you had as the pandemic set in about the residents of your communities?
Well, thank you, Richard, for having me. It's an honor to be here and share the stage with these others. And it is hard to sit down and remember what was it really like in March and April and May of 2020. It seems like a long, long time ago, and there's so much that we didn't know. We didn't know anything. And so our biggest concern was taking care of our people, and that includes our residents as well as our employees. And yes, most, if not all, of my residents, of our people, are frontline workers. And so they're stocking your shelves at Kroger, and they're hairdressers, and they work on your car, and my people in general, if they don't go to work, they don't get paid. And so there was a real tension there. And certainly home became more important than it had ever been. How can you quarantine, even in your off hours, if you don't have a home to go to, and you're less likely to want to move in with mom or extended family under those circumstances because everybody wanted their own space. So our demand did nothing but go up. And like almost every company, I suspect, on the planet, we had to reinvent how we do everything in order to continue to service and provide the maintenance and the upkeep to the communities and to our residents and to their homes, while endeavoring very much to keep our people safe as well as our residents safe.
Some of them were not able to go to work as often as they had, which means income starts to drop and their ability to pay might be compromised. I suspect that you had to show great patience with them, a lot of empathy, which I know Parkland has been known for, but perhaps you're stretched to some end in terms of the amount of empathy you're being asked to show during that period. Is that correct?
Absolutely, and in a sense, that's not anything new. We don't make any money by evicting someone who doesn't pay. Now, the time comes when maybe that has to happen, but we have always worked very hard to work through payment plans, to figure out ways for people to be able to stay in their homes, and we've been very creative for that. Now, during the pandemic, that took things to a whole new level. Not just because shortage of income in many cases, where some of my people were laid off, but also different programs that the government was putting forth. But my people have stepped up during these last 2 years in a way that has really blown my mind. And when I say that, I mean both my residents and our employees. It has really reinforced my faith in humanity, in that residents who were being told by the government that they didn't need to pay their rent paid anyway, and employees who might have chosen to stay home because they are frontline workers chose to come to work and knew that they were working hard and that the company did deserve to be paid for the work that was being done, and did just an outstanding job of collecting where that could happen and of working with and in fact filing on behalf of our residents for any kind of assistance that was available.
Operationally, there are certain things that your employees perform, maintenance of these homes, et cetera, that can't be done any other way than in person, but you did have to adapt certain of the processes to a more virtual work environment. Can you share one or two examples of how you shifted at Parkland Ventures?
Certainly early in the pandemic, I mean, one of the first things we do is triage, right? I mean, somebody's got a screen door that's squeaking, that can wait. And so we keep lists, and when times are better, we're going to get back and get that squeaky door. Now, if you've got something wrong with your sink or your toilet or your shower, or God forbid a leak in your roof, these are things that cannot wait and they need to be taken care of. And so we put procedures in place which in a shorthand fashion basically meant that notice is given. We would have the tenants leave the home for a period of hours. We would have our people go in with some protective equipment, and they would tend to the problem and then come out, clean the surfaces, and the family would be able to go back in. So just as one example of the kinds of things that we were dealing with.
Zach spoke about mental health, and I just wonder about burnout and fatigue particularly among the workers. Did you sense some of that, and did you structure schedules in a different way because of something like that?
We certainly were flexible. As you have pointed out, most of our jobs are things that do need to be done in person. We did close our offices to walk-in visitors, so we conducted the vast majority of our business now over the phone. And when things did need to be done in person, for example, showing a home, somebody's getting ready to move in, or the move-in inspections or move-out inspections, there are things that do need to be done in person. But again, in a similar fashion, managing to have one person in the home at a time, cleaning in between, the next person going in. In terms of burnout, we have just been so fortunate, and I look back on, some of you may be familiar with the Markel style, which has been in place for many, many years, and I believe each one of the ventures companies has a similar statement. For us, it's the Parkland Way. And during the pandemic, it became obvious to me that the Parkland Way really did mean something, and that certainly our people became fatigued, and certainly there were stresses, and those stresses became obvious within our tenant population as well as our employee population, but nothing that was unsurmountable.
Let's move from homes, Ting, to the decor that's part of the home. You've been in that business of providing home decor for close to 30 years, as we said. But I'd like to also shift the conversation from one of really domestic issues to one of international issues. You experience supply chain interruptions almost immediately, and for you, there's almost no bigger challenge than if you've got a supply chain issue, given the path that many of your products travel. First, would you share with the audience the path that many of your products travel in terms of where they're made and then where they're shipped and where they're shipped eventually to the buyers?
Sure. Well, before I answer your question, well, thank you for having me here. This morning, driving into this facility, this location, I got pretty emotional because it's 28 years ago, right here at the State Fairground, when I made 400 flags for a local flag lady, Ben Idea, and she couldn't pay for it when I brought the flags back, and decided to find a place I can sell, and realized State Fair is going on in September 28 years ago. So Dad went to Home Depot, bought PVC pipes, and we built a 10 by 10 booth right here and sold all those 400 flags over the weekend. That was an aha moment, so this place is very special. So answer your question, for our product line, from design here in Richmond, to sending the prototype to oversee many different vendors, and then ship back, and then we're putting catalog and digitally present it on website. That's usually a 6-month process. And during pandemic, at the beginning of about May, when we sense everything kind of came to frozen, there's a lot of our competitors decide cancel orders or reduce orders, retailers as well, and a couple of our senior managers, we get together, and we all said, this is a critical moment, what we think is going to happen a couple months down the road. And we made a decision, say, regardless of what outcome, whether people will buy or not buy, we're going to hold our purchase order with the vendors, which turned out to be a good decision because 60 days later into the pandemic, people are locked in the home, they start buying. So the demand really went up. And the fact that we kept our orders, we were able to continue shipping. As the demands go on, then we start seeing the logistic supply chain really being challenged. And mostly is in the container cost. And it went from before pandemic, about $4,000 to bring a container from Asia to Norfolk. I mean, you guys know it's anywhere in the $12,000 to $20,000 per container, and that's not improving at all. So we definitely see significant delay and a cost increase, and so that's been the biggest battle we have been fighting. But we've been doing a good job, and our salespeople, very company-dedicated salespeople, also quickly pivoting from our traditional customer, which is the gift centers, the gift shops, to garden centers, hardware stores, and the groceries. So that channel became our fast-growing essential channels.
And how much of those rising costs can you actually pass on to customers?
We pretty much have to pass all the cost into the final sales price. But what's good about it, we are seeing customer, they are smart. During the last 2 years, they kind of have to buy whatever is available. Now we already start seeing there's an assortment naturally shift. people are buying it when they think it's good value. So we're quickly pivoting also to the item that's post-pandemic, people still want to buy, the outdoor space. That's going to be a growing category. So we're developing products like, outdoor curtains, outdoor sunshades, and planters, things that, people are going to continue buy, and we will design re-engineering product so the size of the product will be significantly reduced, and then more collapsible, more KD. So there's a lot of re-engineering going on right now.
Our audience may not know that you also operate retail stores. Plow and Hearth is one of them. Just how challenging was that retail environment? How challenging does that retail environment continue to be for you, for Evergreen Enterprises?
Yeah, we made a decision pretty early on that we're going to scale back the retail footprint, the one that's in the strip mall.
Yep.
And we're experimenting more, we call it experiential. So the Plow and Hearth, we have a country store outlet in Madison, Virginia. So we went ahead, bought the 70-acre land that's back to the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountain. So that will be our, experiment to make that a country living experiential destination.
Of all the challenges you faced in 28 years, how did this period stack up against other challenges that you faced in building the business? There's a great theme of adaptability throughout this period. How would you rank this one in terms of business challenges?
This one definitely is one of the most challenging and unpredictable. I mean, Susan and I were talking about now putting a budget together is so different from any other years. It's like how we decide, let's make 2019 to 2022 average. That probably would be the budget for next year. I mean, it's just, there's no new norm yet. We still all try to figure out what that is.
As the conversation shifts to numbers, I'm going to shift over to Tim Hathaway, Chief Investment Officer at Brown Advisory. I want to talk a little bit about the relationship you have with your clients, but also some of the changes you had to make to how business happens at Brown Advisory. Let's start with the latter, if we could. Yours is a business built on trust, and so much of that trust happens in face-to-face conversations between, whether it's an individual investor or an institutional investor, but those face-to-face meetings have been a traditional part of your business for so long, and then they couldn't be. How do you maintain the trust with those investors during a period like this, and what changes were you forced to make in terms of how business actually happens?
Yeah, it's a good question, and first of all, I do want to thank Markel for having me, and thank you, Richard. Last night, having so many conversations with some of the companies, including the founders and operators of Costa, but it just made me realize, culture matters, and I feel like there's a lot of things at Brown that we're trying to aspire to and care about, that are similar to the aspects of the culture that Markel cares about. So thanks for having me here. Trust, so when this all started in March of 2020, as a financial services company, it lends itself to being able to operate virtually, but we had not done that. So, and we had about 700 colleagues at the time, and we had to do it pretty quickly, and we all left that day in March and looked at each other and said, I'll see you in a few weeks, and man, we were wrong. But we all went back, and I think pretty quickly we realized that we could kind of keep the engines going, keep the investment engines going, keep the client relationship intact, and then we had a great infrastructure that kind of supported all of that. But I think over time, that trust is critical. And I think on the institutional side, so dealing with big institutions, what was interesting is the business development and sort of the conversations we were having and attempting to sort of build new relationships with big institutions. It didn't slow down at all, surprisingly so. They just operated. They went virtual, and they didn't sort of miss a beat as far as where they were looking to allocate, funds and selecting managers. On the private client side, that was similar, but at the same time, that was a more difficult transition for a private client to, they were going through a lot of adapting themselves, and you weren't able to make that connection in person, so everything was virtual. And I think what we learned is that over the first, say, 6 months to 12 months is that we kept the business going, and we think we served clients well, and all of our investors, we figured out how to make sure that those engines were connecting in a virtual environment. But eventually, we realized that we had to get back, to maintain that trust long term, that those interactions, we needed them to happen in person again. So we really pressed hard to try to move away from a virtual environment, when colleagues were comfortable doing so, but then also clients were comfortable doing so. But that was definitely something we were pushing towards. And obviously we had a lot of fits and starts, but we recognized that to serve our clients well, for colleagues to feel like they really understood the culture of Brown, we had to move away from a virtual environment. And I think where we're coming out on that is some hybrid version. It's not going back to where we were before, and there's a lot of flexibility and benefits of not going back to where we were before. But I do think that, just as far as connecting with clients, doing it in person matters to us.
How many people roughly might you have hired during the period without ever having seen them face to face?
Yeah, great question. I mean, we hired probably close to 200 people. So yeah, we were growing, and we were sort of hiring across different offices, different geographies, different parts of the firm, investment, human resources, IT, et cetera. So I think we did that, and I think we did that as well as we could have in a virtual environment. However, again, trying to get people to understand our culture, that's virtually impossible to do that virtually, to do that through technology. So, one of the things we've been really focused on the last 6 months is how do we go back and look at all of those employees, 200 or so that started within the last 24 months, and basically indoctrinate them into who we are and what we care about. And because we're now 800 employees, that requires a lot of structure and a lot of intentionality to how you do that. But we realized that we sort of had to go back and say, yeah, they're doing a great job, but it's important to us for them to really understand the whole place, where it came from, what matters to us. So we're putting a lot of effort towards that.
Some of this sound familiar, Zach, in terms of trying to build culture and checking in now in 2022 to see how do we retain the best and brightest that we have been able to hire, and make sure that as we scale up geographically, we're not losing some culture?
Yeah, no question. I think that I agree with Tim. Obviously we had to adapt to a work from home structure, but and this is a little bit maybe my personal opinion, I think the pendulum's going to swing back. I think, ironically, we began to really place a value on being connected because we were separate for a while, and I think there's a greater ongoing appreciation for what togetherness actually means. And it's a cliche, but the things that you can pick up in a hallway conversation, you can't schedule a Zoom call, and are really important to building that culture that Tim talked about.
Ting, I'm thinking about the finance professionals that you've hired, a few of them from the University of Richmond, the accounting professionals, marketing professionals. Are you sensing some of the same thing with open positions you might have at corporate in terms of are they asking how much of this can be done remotely? Are you pushing, you and your leadership team, pushing for much of this to happen in person today so you can maintain culture?
We're taking a hybrid approach, and it's right now we're asking folks to spend 3 days in the office and giving them 2 days work remotely. And there's certain positions like our photographer, videographer, they have to be 5 days in the office. And we've also been doing a lot more activity, like already started a cookout.
Yes.
Yesterday I was in the office, we're giving a fresh flower bouquet to all the mothers for Mother's Day, things that people don't come to office will start feel say, I'm missing out, and I should go into office to see what a happy hour is.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Susan, small practices like this can go a long way. I imagine they had been part of the community prior to COVID. How much of that has come back in terms of the sense of community happening in the communities that you operate, particularly among the workers?
Yeah, I've been really pleased with that. Of course, our people have been on site throughout the pandemic, And in some senses, I would say that the camaraderie has actually built during the pandemic, because there's a little bit of you and me against the world, and we have our biggest challenge even before the pandemic was our dispersed workforce. So we are a small company. We have less than 120 employees, and we have 48 locations. So you can easily do the math and realize that people don't have a lot of other folks around them that are Parklanders, and so where we do have places where we have some benefits of scale and communities near each other in Texas, for example, or in St. Louis or in Michigan, there has been opportunity for getting those groups together. And in the Richmond office, there's been a core of us that have been, my leadership team basically, that's been in the office throughout the pandemic. We could have worked from home, and my admin staff did work from home during the pandemic, but sort of in a camaraderie with our folks in the field, wanting them to know that, we are here. When you call, we're going to answer the phone.
Tim, one of the concepts that I cover with the graduate students at the University of Richmond is something called organizational forgetting. And we talk about this idea that there's unintentional forgetting, where just turnover means that certain institutional knowledge bleeds out of the organization. But there's also what we would call intentional forgetting. And this would be you looking back, say, pre-COVID, and saying, I'm sure glad that we've learned to undo some of what had become routine for us process. Might you cite an example or two? I hadn't previewed for you that we were going in this direction, but I wonder if there's something that fits in that category.
Good. I mean, I think so sort of the benefits of going through this, and what we learned that, is going to lead to us to think differently going in the future. I think that the big one was like flexibility matters, like, creating flexibility in somebody's life and allowing them to balance work life. Like, I think, previously it was you got to the office at 7:30, you left at 5 or 6. And I think we realized that, like, we can allow people to have flexibility, like to, manage their families and sort of balance things a little bit differently. We also recognize that, in certain jobs, being at home for a couple days a week, you're probably more effective because it's a quieter environment, like if you're doing research. So I do think, if anything, flexibility and maintaining that flexibility, and that, I know that's really important to our colleagues, it's important to me. So I think we have to balance that flexibility with connectedness. And I don't think there's like an equation. I was thinking about, with leadership of big institutions right now, I had a conversation with someone this morning about Apple and sort of the pushback on Apple employees being told you've got to come back to work. I mean, to me, this is a very difficult position for a leader to just mandate, here's what it's going to look like, 3 out of 5 or more virtual, or 5 out of 5 days you need to be back. The approach I feel like that's just organically happening at Brown is that the people that are coming back, if they're feeling that connectedness and they like that environment, it's just feeding on itself, where more and more people are thinking, I want to be part of that, versus, there's a meeting of 10 people and I'm the 1 or 2 people that are zooming in for that meeting. I think eventually it's just feeding on itself, like organically, almost bottom up, that people are enjoying being back at work and connecting kind of the old-fashioned way, and hearing about what not just needs to happen from a professional standpoint, but also reconnecting on a personal level. Mm-hmm. So I think that's just organically happening, where I don't think it doesn't necessarily need to be mandated, but every culture is a little bit different as far as how they feel about this.
Ting, how might leadership be different in the next decade than the last decade? What are the particular abilities you think that leaders are going to have going forward? Maybe build on some of what Tim has talked about.
Yeah, I mean, our workforce is definitely, getting younger, and we're seeing they have a different mindset, and I think the work-life balance is very important to this new generation. And right now we are very focused on trying to find what's the most important to them, and what's the connectivity. I kind of call cross-generation, the older employee being with the company for 15, 20 years versus the new one that just come in. And I guess sustainability is very high for this newer, younger workforce. So how we make the company more environmentally conscious, a better company to work for. And for me, I have two, a 28-year-old and a 30-year-old children. They always tell me, Mom, I wouldn't work for you because blah, blah, blah.
They would not work for you.
Yes. So that was kind of the way it made me think, oh, okay, if I want to attract them, I need to do this. So,
That's fascinating to me. Zach, might you have a story similar to that in terms of a practice you had to unlearn? Susan, I'm going to ask you a similar question.
I don't know that it was unlearned, but I think maybe just a dramatically higher appreciation for certain things. In our business, going through a crisis like this, character turns out matters quite a bit. Our nurses are absolute heroes, and I would say the same thing about public school educators or frontline workers, but I got the great privilege of watching this in action. And I had one nurse tell me, one of our Saturday morning vaccine clinics, that she had never been so exhausted or fulfilled at the same time. And it just stuck with me, and I think those are the people that allow you to get through the challenges that we've. So I think just a greater appreciation for how important those personal attributes are when going through a crisis, because this isn't the last one. We're about to go into another 2 or 3, and the value we place on the personal attributes, I think, has risen exponentially.
Yeah. And Susan, among the workers that you're dealing with every day, there must be a few of these heroic stories as well. Can you pull one or two out of those and talk about maybe how you've tried to spread that sort of feeling across the 47 communities?
Well, certainly the ability to be flexible and to adapt and adapt again. I think any person in business today and over the last few years has had those lessons drilled home. And our people have really risen to that challenge. I'm trying to think of a specific question or a specific answer, a specific example. And what's coming to my mind is actually from several years, quite a few years before the pandemic. And we had hired a gentleman coming out of banking, and he was going to be with us in the home office and work on marketing and some different things. And we were a rather gritty business. We serve an underserved population, and we provide a very needed resource for folks. And he did not stay with us long. And his sort of parting comment, and we left under good terms, but his parting comment was, I had no idea how hard it is to make a nickel. And most of the people that live in our communities and the people who work for us, they know how hard it is to make a nickel, and they value the place that they work and the environment in which they work, and we're just trying to live up to that.
In just a few moments, we're going to open up the microphones for those in the audience that have questions of any of these 4 CEOs. I might take a stab at asking 1 or 2 more questions. Tim, we're at the University of Richmond. We're building a leadership development program, actually executing it now for a very large $50 billion a year company. And one of the things that the leaders told us in the midst of building it is that the pandemic had allowed them to identify several people they hadn't thought were cut out for leadership emerged, and all of a sudden they realized they were. They also said a few people they had in mind for the first cohort of this program were no longer going to be invited because of some of what emerged. Are you seeing similar things at Brown Advisory, especially in terms of those that aspire to higher levels of the organization and succession planning, things like that?
No doubt about it. I think a lot of our colleagues kind of emerged, and rose to the occasion. And I think one of the reasons why I think some people were able to do that is they just figured out how to stay very present. And then other people, I think, struggled in doing that.
Yeah.
And I think that might have created some of that separation, that people just emerged and, they were able to, stay involved with a lot of different things that are going on in the firm, connect with clients, but also, go out of their way to just stay connected with lots of colleagues. And some people just sort of naturally were able to do that better than others, and I think that was a benefit, because then you sort of saw something in somebody that maybe previously they weren't in a management type position, but you thought, wow, like this is somebody that we should figure out how to give them some management responsibility. So there's no doubt that it was really like people that rose to the occasion that otherwise you might have gone unnoticed without the pandemic.
Tim, the question I wanted to ask you is about innovation. When the supply chain disruptions occur, you have to get creative about certain things. You have to take certain things that's not going to happen. But I suspect innovation began to occur in a new way at Evergreen Enterprises. Might you have an example or two of that?
Oh yeah, definitely. And right now we are looking at an area where people will spend time, especially in the outdoor living space. We're doing innovation in self-watering planters, sunshades, and the next smoke-free fireplace. But it's in all much compact size, because we were talking about the shipping challenge.
Do you identify a specific team and say this is the innovation team, or do you have practices that allow ideas like that to bubble up from anywhere in the organization?
We do both. The primary is the product creative team, their job, but we also take submission from licensed ideas. Also, a lot of time our customer are the one, they give us the best idea. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, let's turn it over to the audience, see what questions you might have. There are a couple of microphones out there. We'd love for you to go to the microphone or wait for the microphone to come to you so that we can capture your question. Just raise your hand if you have a question or two for these CEOs, please.
Thank you for taking my question. The Markel style of working with Markel Ventures companies has always been hands-off. Decisions are best made out at the operating level. I'm just curious, during the pandemic, whether there were ways that either of you felt supported in new ways because of what you were going through by the home office or by Markel. Thank you.
I'm happy to go first. You were absolutely right. The idea of autonomy but with support is very much the Markel Ventures way, and that has been steadfast, I would say, before, during, and I hope we're getting to after. I think that the folks that run Markel Ventures, and I'm thinking primarily of Mike and Andrew and Jason and others, have the gift of humility and recognize that not being in each one of the businesses every day, they're not as close to it. They don't pretend to have all the answers, but they are rock solid supports behind us. And that very generous mix of autonomy and support, willing to be sounding boards. And of course, that doesn't mean that there isn't accountability, but I would say that they really showed up during the pandemic in continuing to allow the autonomy, but letting us know that they had our back.
Yeah, I would echo everything Susan just said. And I remember that the first gathering, I think the first meeting that Mike and Andrew and Tom brought us all together, just to put a finer point on all the things you just sounded. Tom said, that I want to be very clear that nothing in this world is more important than you and your employees and their families at this moment in time. And I come from a very large company, 32 years in a different industry, and those words were never said. It was a remarkable statement, and they all lived by that, for sure.
I wonder if the two of you were talking to other CEOs. You have the benefit of this family of companies, other CEOs, but I just wonder how often you were, Ting and Tim, talking to other CEOs to get yourselves through this, Ting?
We belong to this America Mail Order Catalog Association.
Yes.
And so regularly talk to our peers, the CEOs, about what they see, and we're very good about sharing information.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Thank you. Tim?
Yeah, I mean, we interact with management teams. The companies we're researching all the time, and we're pretty much every day. So I think we were getting data points about how companies were navigating COVID, also how companies were treating their colleagues during COVID. In some cases, there were best practices for us to think about. In some cases, it might have caused us to think a little bit differently about that company.
Fascinating. Additional questions from the audience, please.
Good morning. You all spoke a lot about hiring during the last couple of years and trying what you could to retain that talent. I'm curious, how well did our regional talent pipeline sustain your needs for hiring, or did you have to go out of our market?
So particular to Richmond, I think, is what we're talking about here.
We don't have a lot of operation. In Richmond, our home office is here, and those employees were very, very stable. So we in fact did not do any hiring in the home office during the pandemic, and the rest of our operations are really outside of the Richmond-Henrico area, so maybe some of the others would have more to add.
Well, we have to hire product developer and product managers, and a lot of them are outside Richmond. And we kind of take a hybrid, have headhunters and also our own HR. But one thing I have to say, Richmond became a city that people want to move to. So, when they pass the initial interview, if we can get them here, tour, and show them around, Richmond is definitely became a very attractive destination for talents.
And the only thing I would add is that years ago, almost 100% of our investment operation was in Baltimore. And then we realized that not everybody wants to live in Baltimore. So particularly now when we're hiring certain professionals, thankfully we have offices in New York and Boston and London and other places, but we have to be more flexible, and we are more flexible. So we're getting more comfortable with people that are in other offices that still need to connect and really be part of a team in another office. But if we weren't doing that, we would not be competitive.
I would just say that our biggest challenge is hiring physicians, like I mentioned earlier. And a few years ago, we had a go-it-alone strategy and using our own networks and finding and attracting as many physicians as we could. And now we've got six outside partners that are helping us find docs, and in many of those cases, that's across the country. I interviewed a doc from St. Croix a couple of weeks ago. For some reason, he doesn't want to come over to Richmond, but it's the search parameters have expanded exponentially.
Certainly time for a few more questions. I see Megan has her hand up.
Thank you. We talked a lot about cultural shifts and the demands on the workforce. From my perspective, leaders took more of a central role in people management during the pandemic. Do you feel like your HR function had to expand, or that you as a leader depended highly on the expertise of your HR function to better understand the needs of the people?
I'll kick it off. We thankfully brought in a head of HR like almost at the beginning of the pandemic. And prior to that, a lot of the HR and people-related challenges sort of fell within the business lines. And I'm just so thankful we had like a professional head of HR who came in, because I think that role now is really an executive role at Brown, and living through, sort of managing around COVID and even wellness and what was going on in people's lives, which was, in a lot of cases was far outside of COVID. Having, that function and having that talent within Brown was just a godsend.
I think it's a great question. We changed our title from Chief HR Officer to Chief Culture Officer, and that allowed us, I think, to just expand the field of play that we wanted that organization to play. And there are big decisions that she's made over the last couple of years, and actually some small ones that have turned into be high leverage. So she started out when we first knew that we were in the throes of a crisis. She started with this reach out to our employees. We have 150 employees, with a question of the day, and we thought it would last maybe 5 or 6 days just to stay connected, and 2 or 3 people would answer. I think she's on day 929, and I don't know where she gets all her questions from, but she's got about 100 people loading up her inbox now. Just little things that can just stay connected and human with one another. Been very beneficial.
What a neat story. Time for a couple more questions. Here's one in the front.
Good morning. I think that every publication we've seen following the pandemic speaks to the Great Resignation. And the Great Resignation isn't everyone just leaving the workforce. It translates into many different manifestations of resignation. People sort of working part-time, a hybrid method, valuing their families more. What have you seen in terms of the Great Resignation and its many different interpretations?
It's not so great. And it is big, though. It's a great question. And again, you have to be creative. With so many parts of your business, we conduct probably 4 or 5 stay interviews each week with our high performers, and that's a practice that changed for us, and it's much more important for us and less expensive to hold on to our high performers than it is to replace them. And I don't know that we're batting 1,000% on those folks staying, but I know that we're batting 1,000 on them sort of giving us the benefit of the doubt or thinking twice before they leave, because it's a very expensive thing for high performers to leave, obviously.
I would just add that I think, I don't think we saw a Great Resignation across the firm, but where we saw, where we were losing people, if anything, it identified parts of the firm where the stress is probably the highest, and then how do we alleviate that stress? Whether that's because we're understaffed or we're just not thinking about those workloads correctly.
Yeah, I would say we've tried to be proactive, and our biggest challenge, frankly, is within the maintenance staff, and not because necessarily people are resigning, but there's just so much demand for maintenance, and the skilled workers and unskilled workers have many, many more options, perhaps, than in the past. And so we've tried to be proactive, both in terms of wages, in terms of flexibility, in terms of time off that is needed, increasing some benefit offerings, just trying to think of all different ways that we can meet our people where they need to be.
There's one here. There's also one in the back, if we could make a microphone.
As a longtime Markel shareholder, I'm really impressed to hear your thoughtful comments today on how you've managed through the last couple of years, and it reinforces for me the quality of Markel and its ventures as an investment. Could you share with us how the last couple of years has impacted your operations financially and your prospects looking out?
Speaking for Parkland, we have been very, very fortunate, again, trying to put ourselves back in the mindset of what it was like 2 years ago with so many unknowns. I mean, heck, I was afraid all my people would quit and nobody would pay. And that neither of those things happened, thankfully. And through a lot of elbow grease and attention to detail, and by and large people doing the right thing, we have had good years financially, and we have been able to maintain collections above 96% throughout the pandemic. And I am just so proud of my people.
And I'd say that it turns out we've got a product that's in high demand right now, access and time with primary care physicians. So it's a good model, and I think we've got a good formula behind the company inside the model. A couple of years ago, our biggest concentration and focus as a leadership team was generating demand. We still want to generate demand, but now it's generating the capacity to sort of accept that demand. We're seeing 25% growth year over year over the last 2 or 3 years. I think that's going to continue. It's just our ability to keep pace with that is going to be the challenge.
Please.
Just how do you think about allocating capital, and how's that changed from the pandemic? Are you more timid in allocating that capital, and do you want to hold more cash just because of the unknowns? And will that change in 2 or 3 years when things become more known?
Well, for us, right now with the growth we had seen the last few years, we are really need more warehouse space, and so we're looking at whether lease or own. And up to this point, it's always been our own warehouse. But with how expensive is the construction cost, everything, the delay, I think we just want a flexibility. So we're also considering lease option as well. So we're being very, very more careful about big capital expenditure. Want to stay nimble, flexible.
I would add that I think this is a time where being private is a huge advantage, and in our minds versus being public, because the industry and the asset management business is under pressure, markets are down, margins are going to be squeezed, and that will cause a lot of companies to pull back spending. But I think over our history of 25 plus years, these are times where the investment opportunities are the best, to be looking to add new capabilities and new people and really not slow down reinvestment back into the business. So I think being private sort of allows us to keep going when we see the opportunities rather than trying to build cash.
For the ventures companies, can you discuss how Markel's balance sheet backing has changed your management style and sort of what that permanent capital means for you?
I would say primarily it means staying power, and I think that it gives them the ability to be patient owners, and therefore they are able to translate that to us, and we are the beneficiaries, therefore, of not being held to quarterly metrics. Again, the accountability is there, but the time frame is one that I think any business would envy.
Yeah, I would just absolutely echo that. I think when we were making decisions to actually expand capacity when everybody was shutting things down, that probably on the surface was counterintuitive, but absolute 100% support, because we're in this, obviously for the long haul, and that's not just a slogan. That's backed up in every conversation we have with the Markel management.
Can each of you please talk about how your pricing has changed over the past few years, especially if you compare it pre-pandemic, say 2019 to now, either if you're in the service businesses or product businesses?
question was on pricing. Is that right? Ting, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I mean, we had definitely seen price gone up anywhere between 10 to 25%. That's how we're pricing it. And for us, the biggest thing is start to educate end consumer about how costly outbound shipping is. You know, Amazon, Wayfair, the type of the world kind of brainwash consumer think shipping is free. It's not free. And so we really need to educate, and especially the surcharge, UPS, FedEx, putting on each box. If I share some data with you, you would be blown away. So I think we got to find a way to share that information to end consumers, they better educate it. It's not going to be forever free.
I don't think the pandemic changed what was going on from a pricing standpoint in the asset management business. I think I have a lot of my colleagues in the audience, and you know, on the private client side, I think pricing or fees has probably stayed somewhat consistent. Clients just want us to do more and more. And then on the big institution, you know, if you're working with big institutions, there's pricing pressure, and I think that's not going away. Like pricing pressure for active managers, I think is just the world we live in.
Additional comments about pricing?
I mean, in our business, we've got all kinds of price pressures. If you live in your own home and you think about the price that groceries have gone up, or your trash collection has gone up, or your taxes have gone up, or utilities have gone up, or any service that you have has gone up, and we face all of those same exact pressures and wages going up, and so we do have to pass those through, and we try to do that, and we have no choice but to do that, and by and large, I think our people understand, and they see the fact that our employees are out there servicing them and have been there every day, and so that helps us, but it's never easy to raise prices.
And we certainly have a model that would support significant price increases with just the mechanics of supply and demand. But in the healthcare space, it's not the same as gasoline, where there's an expectation that you're going to pay more at the pump because of all these macro factors. We're in a model where not everybody believes that you should pay extra for access to healthcare, and so it's a bit of an inexact science, and we're careful about that. But certainly the macro formula would support significant pricing, you know, probably in the next year or two.
Well, please join me in thanking our guests. I'll invite Tyler to return to the stage. Thank you all very much.